It is now 12 o'clock, so I think what we are going to go ahead and do is just get this started. This is being recorded. It is also being streamed live on Facebook. So welcome everybody. This is our Youth Leadership Development Luncheon in partnership with the Lake Washington School District. This runs through our Chamber of Commerce. Actually, on our foundation side, we have a newly formed 501c3 Kirkland Chamber Foundation that is more specifically focused on youth development, leadership, continuing education, and events such as this one right here. So today we are joined by a few people on our Zoom and by the rest of everyone on Facebook Live, just to make sure that it is safe for everyone. If you miss any part of this, just know that we are going to record this and put it onto our YouTube channel so you can see it later. And if you have any questions that come up after the Q&A session has ended, you may also submit those to the Kirkland Chamber office and we will get them to our speaker today for some follow-up answers. So to begin, we do want to thank our sponsors of this program. This type of thing does not happen without your generous sponsorship. Today's sponsors, our presenting sponsor is Google, who we will hear from in just a moment. Supporting sponsors, we have Evergreen Health and Puget Sound Energy, and of course our wonderful partnership with the Lake Washington School District to push this out to all the kids and youth in our community. So to start, let's hear from Ian Goodhue, who is representing Google. And Ian, would you like to say a few words to us today?
Sure, thanks a lot, Samantha. Hi everyone, Ian Goodhue. I'm the Director of Government Relations for Google here in Washington State. And of course, we call Kirkland home to over 3,000 Googlers now. And we look forward to the day, obviously, when we're going to get to return to our office and located in 2 locations in Kirkland. And we're working on a third, as some of you may have heard about, and I know Samantha is aware of. So, you know, Google's mission is to organize the world's information for everyone to have access to. And we are extremely proud to sponsor this event and talk to our young and future leaders about opportunities that will exist, particularly in our field of technology, but obviously opportunities across the board in terms of STEM education and other educational opportunities that they'll have in the future. Google, like I said, we've been in Washington State since 2006. And our presence is only growing, and we plan to continue to grow, particularly in the Kirkland area as we come into economic recovery, obviously from the COVID-19 pandemic, where it hit first and foremost in the city of Kirkland. So we're extremely proud to be sponsoring this event and look forward to the program, look forward to hearing from Joe, who I've known for quite some time, and we're fortunate to have him. So thank you very much, Samantha, for the opportunity to sponsor, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Ian. We really appreciate your partnership with our chamber. You've been an amazing supporter for a number of years, and now particularly over this last year. So thank you, and thank you to our other supporting sponsors today, Evergreen Health, who also is our title sponsor of our chamber, as well as Puget Sound Energy. That's just been incredible to work with as well. So as I mentioned, this is our Youth Leadership Development Luncheon. This is one of our passion projects under our foundation, focusing on education, and we are so fortunate to welcome Joe Sprague with us today. Joe serves as president of Horizon Air, where he is responsible for engaging the people of Horizon and working with them to deliver exceptional regional air service on behalf of Alaska Airlines. Joe views leading Horizon Air as a privilege and deep responsibility. With a focus on safety, continual improvement, and execution, he is committed to working with the people of Horizon to deliver results that further build on the company's strong track record of safety, operational performance, and great guest experience. And I can tell you, as a frequent flyer, I very much appreciate all of that. So welcome, Joe. We are very thankful that you have joined us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Samantha. And I might just start to just verify, can you hear me okay? All right. I'm about 50% in terms of leaving my computer on mute when I start to speak. So I'm glad I remembered this time. And yeah, thanks for the nice introduction. And also wanted to just acknowledge Ian and congratulate him on his role with Google. And Ian, I'm just glad to see that you still have your University of Washington jacket on. So that's good stuff. It's really a pleasure to be with the folks there in Kirkland. Really great spot, really great part of this region. And whether it's Google or a variety of other things, I know there's a lot of good things happening in Kirkland. And one of them is your connection to the Lake Washington School District and what you're trying to do with youth outreach. That's something at Alaska Airlines and Horizon Air that is a passion of ours as well. And so Samantha, I appreciate you acknowledging that as a passion of you and your team. And I just think that's fantastic. And I'm truly honored that participating with you today has that connection for the kids as well, for the students. So thought it might be interesting just to share a little update on Horizon Air and Alaska Airlines. It's a weird time for any sort of business. It seems like the airline industry, anytime anything crazy happens in the world or in the US, the airline industry is almost always impacted, often not in a very positive way. And so it's sort of fascinating, I think, from a general business standpoint, whether you own a small business or you work for a large company like Google, just to sort of take a look at how do other businesses deal with crises and how are they dealing with COVID. And so happy to share a little bit of that from the Alaska and Horizon perspective today. That is a cool shot. I almost would like to just stay on this one slide, the whole presentation, because it sort of captures in my mind a lot of what we do at Horizon. And I'll share a little more about what Horizon is, how it differs from Alaska Airlines and how it does not differ from Alaska Airlines. But that's one of our airplanes, a Q400 that we operate on behalf of Alaska. And great view. I think that's probably a SeaTac with the Olympics in the background there. And it just is a reminder that COVID and all the other challenges we have to deal with, we just still live in a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. And it's neat to be able to get around and see other parts of the Pacific Northwest by way of Alaska and Horizon. So Jen, thanks. Maybe you can advance to the next slide. So let's start with Alaska Airlines. At Horizon, we sort of refer to Alaska Airlines as the mothership. And I'll explain the relationship between the two of us a little bit, but the external brand, of course, is Alaska Airlines. That's what most folks are familiar with. And we're headquartered here in Seattle. We're, a fascinating story. Alaska Airlines, we're coming up on our 90th birthday here in a couple of years, which is hard to imagine. There's only a couple other airlines that have been around longer than that. We are the 5th largest U.S. airline. Of course, Delta, United, American, and Southwest are the big four. And then there's quite a gap before you get to number 5, which is Alaska Airlines, and then JetBlue is number 6, just to sort of put it all into perspective. We used to joke a lot at Alaska Airlines because I started with Alaska Airlines 21 years ago. And I think at the time we were about the 13th largest regional airline. And it wasn't until 2016 when we acquired Virgin America that we actually passed somebody, but steadily over those years, we continued to go from 13 to 11 to 9 to 8 to 7. And it was all really driven by the crazy airline industry and the fact that so many other businesses, so many other airlines were going out of business. And every time one would go out of business or others would consolidate, it would sort of bump up Alaska Airlines on the list. But finally, we actually overtook somebody, and that was when we combined with Virgin America, we overtook JetBlue. So anyway, 5th largest U.S. airline. You can see some of our other key data points there. Most importantly, perhaps you can see the number of employees. We've got probably a hair below this number now, but 22,000 was our number going into the pandemic. Probably a little closer to 23 right before right before the actual start of the pandemic. Heavy presence on the West Coast, as you can see there. But importantly, that route network has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And folks that fly Alaska Airlines know that we've added a lot of service, especially to the Midwest, to the East Coast, and to Hawaii over the past 15, 20 years or so. And so it's a great story of growth. Yesterday, we announced some new service. I'll touch on that in more detail in a minute, but I was just reflecting on it yesterday. It's just like we haven't had it hasn't all been perfect, and we've had certainly our challenges, but it's been a fun ride over the last 20 years where it's been a lot of new service announcements, and we have more of that, I think, coming in our future as well. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Jen. So Horizon Air, what the heck is Horizon Air? Well, I think folks that have been around the Pacific Northwest a long time have oftentimes at least heard of Horizon Air, but I think a lot of folks, even those that have flown with us many times, probably do wonder what is this relationship between Horizon and Alaska. So Horizon is a separate company, but a wholly owned subsidiary company of Alaska Air Group. So Alaska Air Group, the holding company, and then the two operating airlines are Alaska Airlines and Horizon Air. And that has been the relationship since 1986. So it's a long-standing relationship with Alaska Airlines. The company, Horizon, was actually founded by a Pacific Northwest entrepreneur, Milt Colt. And he founded the company, as you can see there, in 1981. And it was a small operation. The first route was from SeaTac to Yakima. A couple weeks later, we added Seattle to Pasco. And that all took place 40 years ago this year. In fact, on September 1st, this upcoming September, we're going to celebrate that first flight from Seattle to Yakima. And over the next few months, we're going to be doing some other things to commemorate the 40-year anniversary. We haven't been around as long as Alaska Airlines, obviously, but from a regional airline standpoint, 40 years, there aren't very many other regional airlines that have managed to stick around for 4 decades. We do have 3,500 of our own employees. You can see our fleet there. It's made up of the Q400 turboprop, which was the airplane on the very first slide in this deck. And then we also have the airplane pictured here, which is the beautiful new E-175 regional jet. 62 of those, you can see the city serve. And it's a good group. That's some of our employees right there, including a couple of our Hall of Famers. We call them our Pathfinders. The guy on the far left and the captain to the right next to the person in the orange vest. Those are a couple of our Pathfinders. And it's just a great group of folks. We have an interesting mix of employees. There's some that have been with the company 20, 30 years or more, and then about 2/3 that have been with the company for the last 5 years, because we are, and this is important for, I think for folks even in the school districts and whatnot, we're an entry point. Regional airlines often are, but even for Alaska Airlines, because of our relationship with Alaska, we become a pathway where folks sort of join Horizon at the early part of their career and then have opportunities, and we'll talk more about those opportunities to pass up to Alaska Airlines. But as you can see from the smiling folks here, a lot of really great folks at Horizon Air. Go on to the next slide. So the network that Horizon flies is changed a lot too, honestly. Regional airlines, there's so much about the airline industry that has changed in the last 20 or 30 years. But when Horizon first started 40 years ago, I mentioned we flew to Pasco and Yakima, and the focus was entirely on serving close-in markets here in the Pacific Northwest, basically feeding Alaska Airlines, once they acquired us, feeding their longer haul flights that departed from Seattle and Portland. And that model still exists today, but the E-175 jet that we acquired, started taking into the fleet 3 or 4 years ago, it's sort of a game changer. And that game-changing element is reflected on this route map here. This is not Alaska's route map. Believe it or not, this is Horizon's route map. This is the routes that we fly, and you can see the heavy emphasis out of Portland and Seattle still. But the range of the E-175 jet allows us to serve a number of destinations, even in the Midwest, that the nature of the route, maybe it's not enough people flying it every day to justify putting a larger 737 type airplane on it. But a 76-seat airplane, which is what the E-175 is oftentimes the perfect sort of sized airplane. And it allows Alaska Air Group to open up to a lot more destinations than it otherwise could. And so you can see that Horizon plays an interesting role. We still fly a lot of those close-in markets, especially with our Q400 turboprop aircraft, who also have 76 seats. We still fly a lot of those routes. We still fly Yakima, we still fly Pasco, Walla Walla, Wenatchee, et cetera, feeding customers into Seattle and Portland. And then, as you can see, we also do a lot of this other more long-haul flying that's interesting stuff, connecting to places like Minneapolis. And just yesterday, our big announcement was that this summer we're going to start service from Boise to Chicago on Horizon Air, also serving Alaska Airlines, of course. And then another big development for Horizon, really big development really, was we, in support of Alaska and complementing their service, initiated service to the state of Alaska this past October. And you can see that line from Seattle to Anchorage, and then we serve some of the smaller intra-Alaska markets, which again, The nature of them is they really need air service, but 150-seat 737 is just a little bit too much airplane for a lot of these smaller communities in Alaska. But a 76-seat regional jet like the E-175 is just perfect. So that's our route network, and that route network then feeds the next slide, which is, thank you, the broader Alaska route network. And this is a similar slide to what you saw at the very beginning, but just a lot of service anymore between Seattle, Portland. With our acquisition of Virgin America in 2016, we established an even stronger foothold in the Bay Area. We've over the years had a lot of service in the Los Angeles area. More recently have designated San Diego as a focus city, so a lot of service emanating from San Diego. You can see all the Mexico. We serve 2 destinations in Costa Rica. And then, of course, Hawaii, ever since 2007 is when we initiated service to Hawaii, has become a very, very important element of our overall business is service to Hawaii. State of Alaska is still a critical part of our company, not just the name on the side of the airplane, but we're so proud to continue to serve 19 different cities in the state of Alaska with scheduled air service, both Alaska and Horizon. Okay, I think the next slide will give you a sense, though, of how we serve customers even more broadly, and that is with our international partners. And Alaska has always had a number of international partners, especially at Seattle, but that whole dynamic is changing very significantly later this month. On March 31st, we will officially enter the One World Alliance. And in the global airline world, there are 3 big global airline alliances, One World being one of them. One World's anchor airline in the United States is American Airlines. That's an airline that we have long partnered with at Alaska Airlines. But our membership, formal official membership in One World, will allow not only tighter, more seamless connections with American Airlines, but with all of the other international airlines in the One World Alliance, as you can see here. So our service really is going to take on a much more global nature by being able to connect to all these different airlines when we join One World. And American Airlines is helping to make that even more real because, as you may have heard, they are initiating service over the next 6 to 18 months as we move beyond the pandemic. They will be initiating their first ever international service from Seattle to Shanghai, London, and to India as well, and so to Bangalore. And so this is big commitments on their part. They'll be flying 787 Dreamliners on those routes, but doing them from Seattle means that they can not only serve the Seattle business market, Ian, hint, hint, but they can also we can also then feed traffic to those international flights departing from Seattle on American. And that's a role that even Horizon will play a key part of as we bring folks in from, the Spokanes and Pascos of the world to make connections to anywhere else on the globe. Next slide, please. So COVID's had a big impact for us. There's no question about that. I think virtually every airline in the world could flash up a slide that for the last 12, 13, 14 months would look very, very similar to this one. You can see January, February of 2020, over a year ago, we were sort of humming along, really in a level that we normally would be, carrying well over 100,000 passengers each month and per day, and things were looking good. We'd come off a really busy, strong year in 2019. And fully expecting to sort of take the company to new heights in 2020. And then, of course, like every business, big and small, we felt the impact of the pandemic. We started to feel that impact. I can still remember the very last weekend in February when there started to be some pretty dark-looking storm clouds on the horizon, to say the least. By St. Patrick's Day of a year ago, things were obviously in steep decline and a lot of uncertainty, and just sort of the wheels came off the bus for everybody as we went through March last year. And then isn't it stark to look at April and May even? And I bet if any of you happen to fly at all during those couple of months, it was just a sort of a surreal experience to come out to SeaTac Airport. I'm right now at SeaTac at the end of the Sea Concourse, and I bet all of you have walked at one point or another down the C concourse and generally had to sort of bob and weave to get through the crowd that sometimes congregates in the C concourse waiting to board flights. It was so strange to walk down the C concourse and literally be able to roll a bowling ball for half a mile and not have anybody anywhere near it. It was just a strange experience. And so we dealt with that as best we could. We'll talk about some of those measures. And obviously, traffic did start to come back. We've been highly susceptible to the different waves of the virus that have hit over the last 12 months. Whenever there was sort of a resurgence in bookings, and then when the second wave and then the third wave came, it definitely had an impact on those bookings. And so you can see that we'll talk about some of the encouraging signs that we're seeing today, but the level of business is still off in the 80 to 70% range even now. Next slide. Well, of course, one of the things that was so critical for us to do was to ensure that when guests were flying on board our flights, that they were safe. And I know a lot of businesses, including probably some listening in right now, have had their own experiences with that. How could they find a way to stay open for business, number one, and then present their services or their products in a way that customers felt safe buying those services and taking advantage of those services. So in the airline world, it was really critical that folks felt that it was safe to get on an airplane. And by extension, that means working with our airport partners like the Port of Seattle to get the airport environment as safe as it possibly could be as well. And it was an interesting transition in the airline industry. We've talked about safety forever. That is the most critical element of what we do. If we can't be safe when we operate aircraft, then we're in real trouble. And so safety's always been a central theme of everything at Alaska Airlines and really all other airlines. But safety took on some additional meaning with COVID because it really, of course, got into the realm of health safety. And was it safe to fly on an airplane and not catch the COVID virus? And so we immediately, last spring, March, and into April, began new levels of enhanced cleaning on board our aircraft. Seats, armrests, the seat belt buckles, everything that would be considered a high touch point is now getting an enhanced level of cleaning between each and every flight. And I can tell you that our aircraft got some level of cleaning between each flights before, and they all got deeper cleanings at night when they were not flying. But now we've made adjustments, we've added staff, we've added equipment so that between every single flight, all throughout the day, there is an enhanced level of cleaning happening in the cabin. The other thing that we've highlighted is that the airplanes already had these HEPA filters that allowed incredibly pure air filtration on board our aircraft at any time when they're operating. And it really is hospital grade. There are multiple of these HEPA filters. And the way that the aircraft are designed, there's already a level of air circulation continually happening. And so that's one of the most important things that now there's been some scientific studies that have shown that it's actually quite safe to fly primarily because of that aspect, that the nature of the airflow through the airplanes and the filtration means that the chances of catching the virus by breathing it, or even if somebody on board near you were coughing or sneezing, that the chances of catching the virus are really, really tiny. And there's been some good studies that have come out. Harvard did one, the Department of Defense did one early on in the pandemic that have sort of scientifically proven out these facts. Of course, at the same time, even with that high degree of assurance about the air filtration, we do require face coverings. Alaska and most other airlines in the US required that early on. Now the federal government has come out and made it a mandate at that level as well, but it was already in place basically by virtue of all the airlines requiring it. And then we're doing what we can to distance folks out, especially as they work their way through the airport environment. So critical area, I think we've made tremendous progress, and we also survey this a lot, and we've been encouraged at Alaska and Horizon by the customer survey responses that we've received, that customers really are feeling pretty good, I would say, about the safety and health factors that we have put in place. Next slide. We've tried to reinforce this, and I hope folks have had a chance maybe to watch the safety dance video. I don't know that it was the first time ever, but it was the first time in maybe 15 or 20 years. Alaska Airlines actually did a Super Bowl commercial that aired here in the regional markets up and down the West Coast that featured this safety dance video. It was sort of a fun play for those of you that remember the song in the 80s. It's a great way to sort of spin that around and talk about all the different things that we are doing to make flying safe on board the aircraft. And you can see some of those depicted here. And the safety dance video, I think, was another positive of it. It allowed us to not only reinforce the safety message, but to bring a little bit of levity, a little bit of fun to the atmosphere of flying and the atmosphere of dealing with the pandemic. And as I'm sure you would all agree, any sort of atmosphere of fun has been in short supply over the last year. And so it was incredibly well received nationally, even globally, this safety dance video. And if you've not seen it, you can click on our blog at alaskaair.com and there's access to it there. Next slide. And by the way, those were all of our own employees, not professional dancers. We had our own performing employees that participated in that. So the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle region, we are super invested here. We've got a lot of our employees that live in Kirkland and elsewhere in the area. So we thought we might just share a few details about our level of commitment to this region. So maybe next slide. We've got a long history there. You can see in the top right the different places that Alaska and Horizon serve here in the state of Washington. You know, it's funny, I mentioned Alaska's coming up on its 90th anniversary, but obviously the name, we were founded up in Anchorage, Alaska, but the headquarters moved to this region, believe it or not, in the mid-50s. And so our presence here in the Seattle region is very long-standing. With the Airline Deregulation Act in 1978, that's not only what helped to spawn smaller startup airlines like Horizon Air, but it allowed Alaska Airlines to then expand well beyond the state of Alaska. And it was in the 80s that route map you saw earlier really started to take off and expand. But all of that has emanated from really from the Seattle area, and the service here in the state of Washington is central to all that we do at Alaska and at Horizon. And all that we do includes a lot more than just flying the airplanes. You can see the bottom left slide there, and I mentioned it in my very opening remarks. It is important for us to promote equity and opportunity at every level, and particularly with youth, and giving the youth in our area better information about the aviation industry and the airline industry is something we put a lot of focus on, including tapping into our CFO there, our chief football officer, to help us make that connection with the youth. And Russell's been a fantastic partner with us and over the last several years in a number of different settings, such as this one at the Museum of Flight, where we were celebrating high school graduates from South Puget Sound. So we do a lot, and the number of jobs that we support here, direct jobs, and then obviously a lot of other indirect jobs and other economic impact. You can see pre-COVID, we were at a $7 billion annual impact here for the Washington economy. Next slide. So part of our presence here is deepening that footprint in the Seattle area in this region, and a very visible example of that is our new corporate campus. This is the primary building of it, and if you notice, we're not specifically calling it our corporate headquarters. In fact, our corporate headquarters building is still the older building that we've had as our corporate headquarters for 40 years now, and it's right across the street, and International Boulevard is the street in question, just south of SeaTac Airport. And so if you've driven through there, you might have driven past our corporate headquarters, not even known it was there, sort of a low building back in the trees. This new building, though, just opened up last April, has been under construction for the last couple of years. It's certainly the largest and most significant new office development in the SeaTac area in a long time. And but we're not calling our corporate headquarters because actually we very intentionally are keeping some of the main corporate offices in the building across the street. And instead, this is for our employees. This one has several areas dedicated to our IT department and our e-commerce activities. It also contains the central operations centers for our operations at both Alaska and at Horizon. And it includes a number of sort of central employee areas. Our company store is in there, meeting and conference facilities as well. We really wanted this to be an area just like a hub at, when referring to an airport, is a place where passengers sort of come in from other places and connect and then go on out to different destinations. And that's what we wanted this building to be for the employees of Alaska and Horizon. And so that's why we're calling it the Hub Building. And it didn't get much fanfare when it opened because it was finished and we got the certificate of occupancy literally a month into the pandemic. And so the building hasn't been quite as busy as it will be, we hope, in the months and years ahead, but a really important piece of our commitment to this region, and a visible one at that. Next slide. So we have sort of always had a very specific community outreach commitment at Alaska Airlines, and Horizon Air has definitely supported that. We have given millions of dollars. Typically, our total giving is around $10 to $15 million per year in corporate giving, much of that focused here in the state of Washington and in the Puget Sound region. With COVID, we did pause and consider, what did we need to make some adjustments? And by the way, isn't this true for a lot of our businesses? COVID has caused us to rethink a lot of different things. And in the airline world, we're rethinking everything from the network that we operate. Should we be flying to business markets or more to leisure markets? But even in the realm of community outreach, we've thought, is there some things we should be doing differently? And you can see a number of items listed here where we have either pivoted and gone more into during the pandemic, or areas where we already had a presence and we were putting even greater emphasis during the pandemic. And it's been important, and I think we've had some good. And importantly, we don't just give dollars or airline tickets. We do that as well, but we get our employees involved in the effort, and they track and log hundreds and thousands of hours of volunteer time each year. And again, a lot of those folks right here in the Seattle area. Next slide. Okay, so beyond COVID, there is a lot of stuff that we need to continue to focus on. There's 3 items listed here that are worth noting, and it's not just Alaska Airlines, but in partnership with some of our key partners here in the Pacific Northwest. One thing, you see the picture on the far left there, SeaTac Airport, where I reside today. That picture, by the way, is artist rendering of when the new North Satellite expansion is completed. That'll be complete later this year. It's on time and on budget. That's really a great thing. The North Satellite will be a beautiful facility. It'll be entirely Alaska Airlines operations on the North Satellite. But it's important that as the Port of Seattle considers, what does their post-pandemic future look like, that we continue to work in really close partnership and collaboration with them. These long-term capital projects, they're very expensive. They're very sensitive to the amount of passengers that are flowing through the airport, and the projections for how many passengers to expect flowing through the airport. At a minimum, some of those projections have shifted to the right on the timeline because of the pandemic. And all of us need to make certain that we're building the right sized airport with the right facilities for what may be coming down the pike. So that's an important area of long-term infrastructure modernization. Another critical area that we are very, very focused on at Alaska and Horizon, but we need to partner with others as well, and that's climate change. And in particular, we have very focused goals at Alaska around reducing our carbon emissions. A key element of doing so is flying much more efficiently. And so that's some things that we can control. We are pioneering new software that is essentially like Waze on your phone app to allow us to fly the absolute most direct routing. So we're not flying any more than we absolutely have to when we're going from Seattle to Denver, Chicago, wherever we might be going. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece of it is working towards an infrastructure that will allow for more sustainable aviation fuels to be more widely distributed. To be clear, sustainable aviation fuels are not a science project. They are real. We have flown a number of flights at Alaska and Horizon over the last 10 years even on sustainable aviation fuels, biofuels, and others. And so this is absolutely a real thing, but it's not something that the infrastructure is there to support just yet in terms of large scale production of sustainable aviation fuels and then distributing those to airport locations. So that's something that we're working on a lot at Alaska and with partners in the industry as well. And then, with the pandemic, we know that the Washington economy, it needs to recover. Every economy in the country right now, some are stronger than others, and there are some signs that there are some pretty healthy elements to the Washington recovery. But we want to do what we can in partnership with others to help that recovery, and in particular for businesses that operate from here. And that's why you'll also see Alaska bringing back flying. I mean, we dropped a lot of flying during the pandemic, but by this summer, our level of flying at SeaTac in particular will essentially be back up close to, if not beyond, where it was in 2019 before the pandemic. And we sort of feel that bringing that level of service back is ensuring that the capacity is there for businesses and other leisure travelers. When they're ready to fly, we want the flights to be there for them. Next slide. I think we're getting towards the end. So last piece is just to touch on our outreach for youth and others that are interested in careers in the airline industry. And we hope as folks in this region consider careers in the airline industry, they think first of Alaska Airlines and Horizon Air. So we definitely are on the lookout for new talent. Now, maybe as we go to the next slide, Jen, what I might mention is that when you are I would say a high school student, maybe even younger than that, but for sure when you're a high school student, I think you first start thinking about, geez, what do I want to do when I'm out of high school or potentially out of college or technical school or some sort of additional post-secondary training? What do I want to do? And if anyone thinks about the airline business, and a lot of folks do, they see airplanes flying by overhead and they wonder about that. I think that a natural tendency is to think about being a pilot. Whether it's from the movies or from being at an airport and just seeing the pilots, that is a highly visible career field. And I can tell you from personal experience that when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to work in the airline business. I'd always had a fascination with airplanes and with airlines. And I just assumed that the best career field possible would be to be an airline pilot. And to be clear, as you can see from these two smiling gentlemen in this picture, the three smiling gentlemen, but two of them are pilots for Alaska Airlines. The gentleman on the right with the glasses, he's actually our Seattle-based chief pilot for Alaska Airlines. He's actually about 10 or 15 feet away from me right at this moment. So if he appears in my background, you'll know why. But I'm using his office as a matter of fact. But we've got great pilots and they know it's a great career field. But I think that if that's your only sense for what career fields are out there, it's interesting because once you start working for an airline, working in aviation, you realize that there's all these other career fields out there as well in the airline business that are incredibly rewarding and satisfying and offer a terrific career. And so if we click to the next slide, I think we'll see some examples of that. So for sure, if your aspiration is to be a pilot, we would love to talk to you about that. And there is no better time. There's really, truly been no better time in the history of the airline industry to get into being an airline pilot than there is right now. The reason for that is there are a huge number, thousands of airline pilots across all of the airlines in the United States that are approaching a federally mandated retirement age of 65 years old. And so over the next 15 years, something like 50% of all airline pilots in the US are going to retire. And yet, as we come out of the pandemic, airlines are going to get back to growth mode. And so they're going to need pilots, not just to replace the retiring ones, but to help fuel the growth that a lot of airlines will do. So there's no better time to consider a career as an airline pilot than there is right now. That said, if flying's not for you, you can see on this slide, there are so many other fantastic careers available to folks at Alaska Airlines and Horizon Air. Other airlines have a lot of these same type of positions, and it just gives you a feel for what's out there. And if you say, well, okay, that's all very interesting, but I don't know about airplanes. I'm more into tech and geez, I think I want to go to work for Ian at Google or something like that. Well, I think if we go to the next slide, it's just a little nudge. Well, this one talks about technicians and pilots. I'll talk more about IT in a second. As we've said, pilots, great field. Technicians, a super important field as well. We've got a high demand for folks to be trained as aircraft maintenance technicians, mechanics, if you will. We need those folks at Horizon. Alaska needs them as well. You can see a couple of folks working on top of an airplane here. Terrific career field, and one that is also a very high demand area right now. Yeah, and then the next slide will touch on the, go ahead, Jen, thanks, the IT and e-commerce roles. Of course, AlaskaAir.com it's something like a $5 billion website, believe it or not. And obviously that's where the majority of our bookings on Alaska Air and Horizon come from, is through AlaskaAir.com. And so all the aspects of the website, the mobile app, the kiosks that we use at the airport, all critical functions of our e-commerce team. And we have a lot of folks been with us a long time. We have folks that come to us from other tech companies, and they're excited to be essentially at a tech company that also happens to be an airline. IT, same thing. And we're, it's been neat to see, even in the last 5 to 7 years, the types of IT applications that have rolled out into the airline environment as tools for our employees to use. And all of those, whether it's, using mobile devices or iPads to check customers in, different types of apps that we use for everything from calculating the weight of the baggage on board the aircraft to determining, whether guests are going to need special services when they get to their destination. All of those internal tools are supported by a fantastic IT team, and they do a lot of the development in-house. I was in Boise yesterday, as I mentioned, and we are piloting a project where we're going to have our own ticket printers instead of using an outsourced provider of those for the kiosks at the airport. And we had 2 of our young IT folks there in Boise. They traveled over for the day from Seattle to help install and ensure that this new application was working correctly. So just an example of how IT and e-commerce career fields are thriving at Alaska Airlines right now. Maybe the next slide, I think we're about at the end. We do a lot of internships as well. In different areas. This sort of gives some highlights of those. We want to give folks an opportunity to be sort of immersed in the aviation industry to help them decide at a young age if this is something for them. Our aviation day that we do every year, we'll get back to that as soon as we can after the pandemic, is a fantastic way for high school students in the area to come out and really get their hands on an airplane and walk around the hangar and see what it's all about. And then we do a lot of other programs as well for interns, folks from high school and college, to have a chance to really work alongside of our own employees in the operation. Next slide. Last thing is, I mentioned this earlier, and it's an important aspect of what Horizon does for Alaska. So we feed passengers into the Alaska network. We do a lot of the flying, especially during the pandemic for Alaska. But importantly, we also serve as a entry point, as a regional airline, for people coming into the industry for the first time to gain invaluable experience flying airplanes, working on airplanes, as you can see the guys on the left there, serving as flight attendants. And then we have actually formal agreed upon pathway programs with Alaska Airlines. So if you are a maintenance technician, a flight attendant, or a pilot at Horizon Air, you are guaranteed a chance to interview for that same job after a certain point, and after certain qualifications are met, you're guaranteed to have a chance to move on to that same career path, that same job at Alaska Airlines. And so our hope is that whether it's any one of those 3 career fields or even some of the others, that folks will join Horizon Air, maybe right out of college or right out of specialized training after high school, and work for us for 5 to 10 years, and then go on to a career of 20 or 30 years at Alaska Airlines. And it's sort of an ecosystem that allows us to give people that sort of chance from the very beginning of their career all the way through to the end of it. All right, I think that might be it, Jen. Very cool picture there, sort of hopefully inspiring for young folks to want to consider aviation careers. And if they do, and they're from Lake Washington School District or anywhere else, we hope that they'll consider Horizon in Alaska first. So thanks, Jen, for the help with the slides. And Samantha, I don't know if we're going to take pictures or not, or take questions or not, but that's what we wanted to share with you today. And thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Yes, we do have some questions. And if you're watching on Facebook, please be sure to enter your questions into the chat as well. But again, thanks for that great presentation, Joe. We have a few that have come from the students. So let's see. First, does Horizon have a presence in Payne Field?
Yeah, thanks for asking. In fact, in the presentation, there was a picture where I was gushing about some of our employees, including a couple of our Pathfinders. That picture was taken at Payne Field. Some eagle eyes might have recognized the Payne Field Tower in the background behind our airplane. So we started in about mid-2019, after years and years of discussion about the initiation of commercial air service out of Payne Field. Horizon and Alaska Airlines were the first to do so when the new terminal was constructed there at Payne Field. And we worked from the early days with the terminal developer and with Snohomish County. And so we were absolutely thrilled to begin that service. And the service is on Horizon Air E-175s on behalf of Alaska Airlines. And we serve a number of points down into California. What I'll tell you is that before the pandemic, and especially when surface traffic was, as bad as it was around the region before the pandemic and before folks were working from home as much as they are now, the attractiveness of folks in North Seattle and Snohomish County, Everett, Mukilteo, et cetera, to be able to fly out of Payne Field instead of fighting traffic down to SeaTac was really quite good. And so early on, those flights were a big success. And service to Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, places such as that. We'd announced service to Spokane and Boise as well. And Portland, we were flying. The pandemic certainly changed, as I said, a lot of things, and it did change the demand patterns for passengers. With the lack of traffic, surface traffic that is, road traffic, it's a little easier right now anyway, most days, to get from the north end down to SeaTac. And there's just a greater number of flight options available out of SeaTac. And for us as an airline, it's better for folks to sort of funnel into a place like SeaTac where we can get as many people as possible onto a flight. But I would tell you that Payne Field, we're still flying a smaller number of flights out of Payne Field. And as we see things continue to come back after the pandemic, our full expectation is we will get back up to a full complement of flights. And we actually have a lot of optimism for Payne Field in the future. Great,
thank you. Another question, are there plans to have pilot-less flights? So, self-flying plane.
Sort of autonomous flying. That's a good question. And I hope it wasn't asked by somebody who was considering a career as an airline pilot and is wondering whether they should or not, because maybe there won't be airline pilots in the future. That's definitely not the case. But it's a good question, and autonomous cars are obviously getting lots of attention these days. There is some interest in autonomous flights. The whole drone sensation is a good example of pilotless aircraft. And certainly some drones, whether it's Amazon experimenting with package delivery using drones, there is probably some application for autonomous aircraft that would be operated without a pilot in the aircraft. Obviously, somebody on the ground will be operating it. But I don't know that will ever migrate all the way to large-scale airline flights with 76 to 150 to, in some cases, with wide-body aircraft, 300 or 400 passengers. Those larger airlines, I'm quite certain, will always require trained, qualified professional pilots to be operating the aircraft.
Great, thank you. Are there any jobs available in other areas besides the SeaTac area, like maybe on the east side, Kirkland, Bellevue, this area?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. Horizon we have a pretty large presence in Spokane, for instance. We have a maintenance base that we operate there. For folks in Southwest Washington, we do have a very large maintenance operation at the Portland airport. And it's interesting because I think half or more of the Horizon and Alaska employees that work at the Portland airport live across the river in the Vancouver area. Here in the Puget Sound area, we have a reservation call center that is not physically located at SeaTac, but even more than that, it's an area that even before the pandemic, our reservations call center agents were allowed to work from home. So that's been something we've had in practice for about a decade now. So we have folks that work for Alaska Airlines that live all over the Puget Sound region that are taking reservations calls and helping our guests with other issues with their flights, doing it remotely like that. But from an office standpoint, here in the Puget Sound area, other than Payne Field, the rest of our activities are concentrated around SeaTac.
So thinking back to your career as a student in high school and in college, what are some of the key things that you learned that helped to prepare you for the job that you have today?
Good question. I hope that one came from a student. If not, I hope that the answer will get to them. I actually started my career as a pilot, as a commercial pilot. And then I joked that I got lost on the way to the airport one day and ended up in a management role. But whether flying an airplane or working in the different management roles that I've been blessed to be in, there's no question in my mind that communication skills are critically important. And you might say, wow, really? Even in a highly technical business like flying airplanes or working on airplanes? And the answer is yes, absolutely. The ability to speak and write well is so critical, even in those technical job fields. In fact, it's the piece that I think can help distinguish somebody, can help them have an advantage, even if their technical skills are incredibly sharp. If on top of that, they've got really strong communication skills, that can really set somebody up for really significant success, in my view. Certainly, math and science are super important. You know, we talk a lot about STEM programs and the importance of STEM, without question. And those that come into some of our positions, whether they're in IT or whether they're in aircraft maintenance or even flying the airplanes, they are pretty technical. And so having strong science and math skills is also good. And I didn't have, just to be clear, I did not have the strongest science and math skills, and I still managed to make it through as a commercial pilot. So what I would say is if somebody feels like they're not an A+ student in calculus, that does not mean they can't still have a very rewarding, successful career in aviation.
Great. So also kind of thinking back to through your career, what is something that has been a big challenge that you maybe have had to overcome to get to where you are today? One of those interview questions, right? What's something that maybe the students watching might, have something that comes up in their life that they will have to overcome. It's always helpful to hear from people who are successful about this.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Samantha. Well, I wasn't anticipating that one, but I will share something, I guess. And I wasn't planning to share it, but so if I fumble with this a little bit, bear with me. But yeah, I'll just, this maybe would be good for the students to hear too. As I say, I started off flying. I flew a couple of years as a commercial pilot. I was flying for a small commuter airline up in the state of Alaska. And I won't bore you with the details, but to summarize really quickly, I was involved in an aircraft accident. And it was, without question, it was my fault. And at age 24, when I felt like I was on a pathway to becoming an airline pilot and having that as my career for the next 30 years or so, that was a obvious, huge setback, and fortunately survived the situation, but then also sort of was pretty quickly despondent, thinking that might be the end of my aviation career. And the most important takeaway is that it was not the end of my career. I feel so blessed to be in this role now, leading Horizon Air. And I've had a lot of other fantastic jobs with Alaska Airlines and a couple of other regional airlines before that. And so, setbacks happen, would be what I would say. And they can defeat you if you let them, but they don't have to defeat you. And especially if you have the support of friends and family, tap into that and sort of get back up on your feet as fast as you can and keep moving forward. That's what I would say. Keep moving forward even when you have setbacks.
That is great advice. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the Facebook feed. If anybody has anything on the Zoom, please pipe in now, and I will ask you, Joe, to if there's anything else that you can think of in terms of advice for our students or our larger business community that is watching this. What would you have to say to them? Advice for either traveling in the future, or COVID, or business recovery, or you've seen quite a bit over this last year specifically, but over your career.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of random thoughts. First of all, I want to thank you, Samantha, and your team at the Kirkland Chamber. What you are doing and what other chambers of commerce are doing it's important even under normal times, and these are not normal times. So your support for businesses in the Kirkland area it's critical. And so thank you for everything that you are doing. And I'm super impressed that the Kirkland Chamber has the connection with the school district that it does, and that have the vision to sort of be encouraging, tomorrow's business leaders today through your programs with the schools. So well done on that front. For the business leaders that are listening, hang in there. I'm involved separately from Horizon with a small business up in the state of Alaska myself that's been pretty severely impacted. Just keep the faith and tap into resources like the Chamber of Commerce. And then what I would strongly encourage, I'd be very remiss if I didn't do this, is take a break. Everyone's been working hard, and it's been a tough year. So if you can manage to do so, get away. And honestly, it is super safe to fly, and we're seeing increasing numbers coming out and flying every day. So I would encourage your chamber members to go on a trip somewhere, and preferably on Alaska or Horizon, but if not, any airline. But get out there and take a little break, and hopefully grab some sunshine somewhere else. And then most importantly for the students, probably just back to my last answer, I admire students, high school students, during this time. I've got a couple of 20-somethings myself, and I'm impressed with how resilient they are, how they've sort of, I don't know about taking the pandemic in stride, but they've certainly adapted to the realities of the pandemic much faster than I think I would have when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. So I applaud the students, but I also know it's not easy. There's lots of uncertainty, and just as I said, keep moving forward, stay close with your friends and your loved ones, study hard, do well, especially in English, and keep moving forward.
That is great advice. Thank you, Joe. And as a person who flies every month on Alaska, I can definitely say that it is super safe. I have been very impressed, and I have felt safe on those airplanes every month during this. So
thanks for your business.
And thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you to all of you who are watching on Facebook. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Google, Evergreen Health, and Puget Sound Energy. We appreciate you for making this possible. Without your sponsorship, these things don't happen. And thank you to the Lake Washington School District for your partnership on this. We love doing these. This is one of our favorite things to do. And as we grow our 501c3 foundation, we are going to be doing just more and more programming for continuing education, as well as our youth, which of course it's our mission to help build up the future leaders of tomorrow. So thank you again, Joe. And if anybody has any additional questions, you can send them to our office, send them to info@kirklandchamber.org, and we will get those over to Joe. And again, this recording will be available on our YouTube channel following this event. So thank you everyone for your participation today. Bye-bye.